What happens when a family is faced with the horror of a departed loved one who not only returns in spirit form, but is hell bent on taking his wife with him into the next realm? In today's experience, I share the extreme efforts that this family went through in order to protect their mother and send this spirit away. Today's experience of the paranormal is fortunately not mine. It is an experience that belongs to my cousins and my aunt. This particular set of cousins were on my dad's side of the family. My aunt was one of my dad's sisters. He had two sisters. And this particular branch of the family and I grew up together when we were kids. And when I was about 10, they moved to Mexico. Now, my aunt was married to this man who was, unbeknownst to me at the time, because I was just a little kid, he was extremely controlling of her. Years later, it came out that he dictated what my aunt wore in terms of the types of clothes she was allowed to wear, what color her clothes had to be. He also never allowed her to cut her hair. By the time he passed away, my aunt's hair was down to just past her knees, and she suffered from chronic migraines. And my mom, her sister-in-law, would always tell her, you need to cut your hair. You know, the scalp, it's requiring too much nutrition to feed all that hair. Her husband would never allow her to do it. And then it came out after her husband passed away that he also beat her, unfortunately. So it was, a little bit of a family backstory here, so you understand the dynamics of what was going on. They had 5 children, 4 boys and a girl. And so they moved to New Mexico. The family up and moved, and that's where things got worse, and the abuse kicked in, and who knows what else he was up to. Eventually, he passed away. He was quite a bit older than my aunt, I think by about maybe 15 years or something like that. So he eventually passes away, and passes away peacefully at home. No drama, no long drawn-out illness, nothing like that. And so some time goes by. Now, I was probably about 18 or 19 at the time of his passing. So I'm not sure of the specific timing of it as to how long of a length of time passed between the moment he died and when the paranormal activity in their home started up. Prior to that, their home had been perfectly fine. Nothing strange going on. So a short time after he died, and it was well within a year, probably within 6 months, I'm guessing. And again, this is based on stories I heard at the time of the incidences. They would hear the front door slam. Now, whenever he would come home from anywhere, my uncle would always slam the hell out of the door. And you don't need to slam a door, but he would slam it so loud it could be heard throughout the house. And one of my cousins would say, that's basically was his way of announcing that I'm home, now you all have to pay attention to me, type deal. Well, they would hear that door slam. And whenever something paranormal occurred, with a few exceptions that just happened to my aunt, there were always multiple witnesses. My aunt would hear or see it, at least one of her kids would be with her. In a couple of cases, the entire family was in the room. So, this was not some sort of weird reaction to grief playing out. Maybe relief, instead of grief. I don't know. But there were multiple witnesses to much of this paranormal activity, to the bulk of it. So they would all hear that front door slam the heck shut. And the sound would reverberate through their home, just as it did when their father and husband was alive. So they knew immediately it was him. And unfortunately, at the time, they didn't really make any effort to tell him to leave. He had the whole family so afraid of him. They couldn't stand up and say, hey, you're dead. You don't belong here. Get out. They did not have the emotional strength and wherewithal that is required of a person to send the spirit of a loved one back from whence they came. And it really does take a great deal of emotional effort to carry that out. So time marches on, right? And it's like about maybe about 4 months go by. We're still talking about within a year of my uncle's passing. So they'd hear that door slam and it would reverberate through the whole house. And then one morning they get up, to fix breakfast, and my aunt opens the cupboard where the coffee cups are to take out a couple of coffee cups for her and a couple of my cousins who would drink coffee, because they were old enough at that time to do so. And 3 cups inside the cupboard, she lifted them by the handle and like the bases just fell off. They were broken, these 3 cups. And they were all like, what in the hell? And all of a sudden you heard, bam, the sound of that front door slamming and reverberating through the house. And they were like, no way. Because that is a manipulation of a physical object by a spirit. So, they chalked it up to paranormal activity immediately. My aunt, my dad, they were raised in a small town in Michoacan, Mexico, and they were raised in a superstitious manner. In this town, they believed in all sorts of stuff going on. And actually, there's some really weird stuff that happened to my dad. And if you want to watch one of those stories, check this out here. But after this one's over, so you don't lose your place here, okay? Thank you. So they have the 3 broken cups. My aunt's got to toss them out. She gets out 3 other ones. They have breakfast like normal. So at this point, my aunt and my oldest cousin, they're like, we can't have this continue. This was a violent act, and we all know how he was in life. So the 2 of them went off to their local church. We were all raised Catholic, so it was a Catholic church, and they spoke with the priest about what was going on. And the priest immediately offered to come to the home to do a blessing. So they had him come out. Now, in cases of the paranormal, when you invite someone in from the outside to either bless the house or cleanse the house, or maybe just to investigate the activity, usually what's going to happen is the activity is going to ramp up after that, because the spirit has been directly acknowledged. That's the risk you run when you invite an outsider into your home to deal with the paranormal activity. Well, my aunt and my cousins didn't really take that into account. And considering my uncle's violent nature when he was alive, they didn't really consider that this could go really south. Well, that's what happened. The priest comes in, he blesses the home, and he does confirm to them there's definitely a presence in the home. And upon leaving, he tells my aunt, I don't think I completely got rid of him for you. If you need me to come back out, I will, just call the church. And she was like, okay, thank you, Father, and thank you for your efforts. And, off he went. So that night, my aunt goes to bed. Everybody goes to bed as normal, and everything in the house was quiet. So my aunt's sleeping, and it's like, the feeling you kind of get when someone is staring at you from behind? You get that feeling, and you turn around and someone actually is looking at you? Well, that feeling woke her up in the middle of the night. She felt like someone was in the room staring at her, and she thought maybe it was one of her 2 youngest kids, and maybe one of them was sick. So she cracks open an eye, and she's like, yeah, ¿qué pasa? What's happening? And no answer. And so she's laying there and she's like, okay, I'm just, I'm nervous because I had the priest come out and, I'm just going to go back to sleep. So she's settling in again and trying to go back to sleep. And all of a sudden she hears a movement, and it wasn't a definite physical movement. It was more like how, when someone's walking through a room and they're wearing like a dress or some baggy clothes and it brushes up against the furniture. It was that kind of a very gentle, soft swooshing sound. And my uncle had always made my aunt wear these long flowing dresses. So she immediately recognized the sound she would make as she'd walk through the home and inadvertently brush against a piece of furniture during her day, And so she's like, someone's in my bedroom. So now she's wide awake. She reaches over, turns on the lamp on the bedside table, doesn't see anything. Everything looks normal. But, her heart's pounding. She's afraid. And she's like, I don't know what's going on, but I'm going to get up and I'm going to check on my kids. So she gets up and she goes to each of the bedrooms. Everyone's asleep. No one in the house is awake except for her. So she goes back down the corridor to her room, walks into her bedroom, gets in bed, switches off the lamp, and figures, I'm just being paranoid. I'm being silly, So she's laying there, and all of a sudden she hears, "You're mine." And I've seen it. When my aunt would recount this experience, the hair on her arms would stand straight up. This woman was not lying. But the voice said, "You're mine." She figured right away who it was, and she said out loud, "You're dead. You don't belong here. Get out." Then the sound, bam, as that front door slammed. Woke everybody up. A couple of the kids were screaming. Now, they weren't little at this time. 2 of them were like around 10 or 12, and the rest were older teenagers. So, they weren't teeny tiny or anything, but still, you hear a loud bang in the middle of the night and you're dead asleep, that's going to scare the crap out of anybody. So, you had kids freaking out. She was freaking out. They were all freaking out. So the next morning, she calls the priest and tells him what happened. And he's like, oh no. So he comes to the home and he says, I don't have permission from the church to do this. You're going to have to call someone else, but I know this couple who go around and they get spirits out of houses. So he gave my aunt their contact information, and then he blessed the home again and asked for protection and all this, and then he left. Okay. So right after he left, my aunt did not waste any time. She went to her phone to pick it up to dial it, and the phone was dead. The line was dead. Now, this is in Mexico, but they lived in, I can't remember now if it was Mexico City or if it was Guadalajara. It may have been Guadalajara because I had another uncle, one of my aunts and dad's brothers who lived there. So they could have been in Guadalajara, but anyhow, her line was dead. So she couldn't call anybody. And this was way, way, way back in the day. We're talking like probably early to mid 1970s. So, there weren't any cell phones. And so she had to wait until whatever repairs were necessary were made, which evidently happened by bedtime that night when the line came back on. Now, by this time, it was like close to 11 p.m. or so. And she figured, to heck with it, I'm calling them. I don't care how late it is, because she suspected that it wasn't a technological issue with her phone, if you know what I'm saying. So she calls this couple, and the man immediately answered the phone. And he says into the phone, "Hello?" And she's like, "Hello, I'm so sorry to call so late." And he says, No, are you the lady whose deceased husband is still in the home? And she's like, yes. And then he said, my wife knew you were going to call tonight. We were up waiting for your call. And she's like, oh, so Father so-and-so told you I was going to call, because, he had given my aunt their phone number. He goes, no, my wife just knows things. And she's like, oh, wow. So already, she's totally impressed and is already believing these people are the people who can help her. What followed was like a 3-month period of this couple repeatedly having to come to the home to try to drive out the spirit of my deceased uncle. And he would fight them. And my family, my cousins and my aunt ended up dealing with poltergeist activity. Objects would get thrown and broken. Things would move. They'd get massive cold drafts in the home while this couple was there trying to cleanse this guy out of there. So now there have been repeated cleansings on their home, and the activity ebbs and flows. But when it gets bad, it gets really bad. And on one particular night, it got to be really bad. My aunt was in bed again, sound asleep. All of a sudden, she's awoken by the intense physical sensation of a pair of hands gripping her from around her ankles. And then she says she was pulled out of bed, ankle first. So she's being pulled down the length of her bed onto the floor, all the way to the door of her bedroom, which was closed at the time. She said had the door been opened, the spirit probably would have dragged her out into the hallway, and who knows how far he would have gotten with her. All the while, she can hear her husband's raspy voice saying, "You're mine. You belong to me." And so she starts screaming. Her kids come out of their rooms, and they're like, "What are you doing here on the floor?" They throw open the door to her bedroom, and it basically hits her in the feet, I guess, because she had been dragged all the way to the door. And she says, he was here, he pulled me out of bed. And my cousins say my aunt was completely hysterical for darn good reason. And they had to help her into bed. They got her some water. They tried to get her to calm down. And she ended up leaving the home and going to stay either, I can't remember if it was a friend or a neighbor, but she, after that incident, would not sleep in the home again. Who could blame her, right? And unfortunately, they didn't have very much money, and they couldn't afford for my cousins to go anywhere, so they were kind of stuck there. And like I said, they were older. They could basically take care of themselves by this time. So it wasn't like a situation of child abandonment or anything like that, but they were like, we're kind of stuck here. And thankfully, they were a little bit tougher than my aunt was, because when the couple next came to cleanse the home, they were like, "Where's your mother?" And they told them what happened, and they were like, "Oh my God." And they were saying, "It's gotten so much worse." And they said, "What about at the other home? What's going on at the other home?" And they said, "As of right now, nothing, except that when we go to visit her, as we're walking down the street toward the house, we can see our dad sitting outside on the front stoop." So he was outside the other home, but for whatever reasons, he couldn't get into that home. My theory is he in life was never in that home. He did not have any type of energetic connection to these people who lived in the other home where my aunt was staying. I think that's probably the only thing that kept him out. They may have had some sort of, religious protections up. At this time in this area, people were, very religious, again, very superstitious, and so they believed in the sanctity of religious items that were blessed by a priest and that sort of thing. So they may have had some stuff. up around their home to protect them. I don't know the specifics, but all I know for sure is that my cousins would see my uncle sitting on the front stoop when they would go visit my aunt. All of them would see him at the same time. And my oldest cousin would yell out, "Hey, you don't belong here. You leave our mother alone and go back to hell where you came from." And he would just gradually fade out and disappear. And then they'd go into the home. So now the couple who are doing the cleansings realize this spirit's really dark. And what if, just what if, it's not actually the father, but it is something that has taken on his form? Now, that was a possibility that had never occurred to anyone until this time. And so they were thinking, we need to treat this like a demonic exorcism. So once they switched tactics a little bit and amped up their efforts, it took only 2 more visits of coming out and exorcising the home of that spirit. Now, whether that spirit was actually my uncle or a demonic spirit in disguise, we'll never know. But in my opinion, in life, my uncle was a fairly rotten person. I wouldn't say he was evil, but he definitely was, not a good husband, not a good father. I really think it was his spirit. And he couldn't rest because he was such a massive control freak when it came to my aunt that he wanted her with him, literally. And so I think that if enough time had gone by, he may have eventually figured out a way to kill her. I don't know, but that's kind of my theory. So this is what happens when sometimes a departed loved one does not remain departed. I hope you've enjoyed today's episode of True Tales of the Paranormal. I am Nefra Kefri, your hostess with the Ghostess, wishing you a blessed day ahead.